be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to festival custom. After they had completed its days, and they were returning, the boy Jesus remained behind in Jerusalem. But his parents did not know that. Thinking that he was in the caravan, they journeyed for the day, and looked for him among the relatives and acquaintances. But not finding him, they returned to Jerusalem and looked for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astounded at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Please be seated. Can you believe this year is almost over? It's amazing how fast it has gone. And on this last Sunday of the year, we celebrate the Feast of the Holy Family. And by celebrating it on the Sunday just after Christmas, the church asks us to look to the Holy Family for inspiration. And in doing so, we also must appreciate and learn the sacredness of our own families. Now, when we think of the Holy Family, we think of Joseph, the man who God chose to be the head of the family. And Mary, who willfully submitted herself to God's overall plan. And the child Jesus, who in the home of Joseph and Mary grew in wisdom and understanding until the day he began his own public ministry. Now, we know very little about the Holy Family through the Scriptures. We mostly know about the early years. The birth of Jesus in Bethlehem, the family's flight to Egypt, and of course, Jesus at a young age being in the temple. But it doesn't tell us much more than that. It also tells us, though, about the close-knit family relationship that they had. And at the early age of 12, Jesus was already demonstrating his life's direction. At that early age, he was starting to assume the responsibility that God the Father had given him. And we believe that all families are molded in God's plan. From the start of creation, God did not want man to be alone. So he created the human race as a family. And he intended that the Son of God, who is like us in all things but sin, be born into that human family. And besides our own families, we also belong to God's family. We are all brothers and sisters to one another. And therefore, we have the obligation to look out and care for each other. We are all children of God, and thus members of one universal family. Now, the gospel reading today tells us about Jesus being lost, or at least his parents thought he was lost, in the temple on their visit there. But what we see is that Jesus really wasn't lost. What he was doing was fulfilling what God the Father had in store for him. The parents did not know that. What was important for Mary and Joseph was to find their lost son. what was important to Jesus was to do his Father's will. Now I'd like to tell you a story about a woman who liked to cook bacon, eggs, and biscuits every so often for dinner for her family. And one day, after a long day of work, she came home and made that meal. But she left the biscuits in too long. When the family sat down for dinner, of course, the biscuits were burned. But the husband took one of those biscuits, spread honey and jelly and everything else on it, and ate it like it was a gourmet meal. When dinner was over, they all got up. The wife profusely apologized. The husband went over to his wife, put his hands on her shoulder, gave her a big kiss, and with such a seriousness in his voice said, "Honey, I love burned biscuits." Well, later that night, the son went up to his dad and says, "Do you really like burned biscuits?" The dad wrapped his arms around his son and said, "You know, your mother had a long, hard day of work and she was very tired. And you know what? A little burned biscuit never hurt anybody. Life is full of imperfect things, and none of us are perfect. What I have learned over the years is to appreciate and accept other people's differences. One of the most important keys," he said, "to creating a family is to have a healthy, growing, and lovely family relationship." And that's my prayer to all of us today, that we realize that love, forgiveness, kindness, and patience are virtues that begin at home in our family. And we carry those over to our larger family, the body of Christ, the church, which is all of us. And we are mandated to love one another as God has loved us. So as we continue this Christmas Eucharist, let us believe what God has told us and look to the Holy Family so that we are united ourselves in love, respect for not just our families, but for one another.